True crime. Baby Reindeer. One act of kindness changed everything. It began with a cup of tea. In the story most viewers know, it begins with a struggling comedian behind a bar and a distressed woman on the other side of it. He offers her something small, ordinary, almost weightless. She stays. She talks. She returns. What looks like kindness begins to gather pressure. But the real story around Baby Reindeer did not stay inside the show. It moved from a London pub to a one-man stage performance to a global streaming hit and beyond. The life before the case. Before Baby Reindeer became a title on a screen, Richard Gadd was building a career from live performance, discomfort, and autobiography. His work already sat in the difficult space between comedy and confession, especially through shows that used shame, trauma, obsession, and humiliation as narrative material rather than decoration. That matters, because the story did not first emerge as an anonymous internet rumor. It began as a controlled solo performance, one man on stage, shaping his own account through voice, timing, disclosure, and selected evidence. A theater audience could understand it as personal testimony, but also as performance. The cup of tea had become drama. The problem was that viewers did not leave it there. The people around the story. The show uses fictional names. Gadd plays Donnie Dunn, a version of himself. Jessica Gunning plays Martha Scott, the woman whose attention becomes frightening, repetitive, and destabilizing. Other characters represent intimate relationships, professional circles, and trauma linked to the entertainment world. Outside the show, the central real-world dispute has three public figures at its core: Gadd, Netflix, and Fiona Harvey, a Scottish woman who publicly said she was the person behind Martha. Harvey has denied core parts of the show's portrayal and later sued Netflix in the United States. Public appellate docket records list Harvey as plaintiff and Netflix entities as defendants in the Ninth Circuit appeal. Gadd is not listed as a defendant in that appeal docket. That distinction is important. The legal fight is not a criminal stalking prosecution against Harvey. It is a civil defamation and emotional distress battle over what Netflix showed, what it claimed, and whether a reasonable viewer could connect the fictional Martha to Harvey. The public argument often flattens the story into real Martha versus Baby Reindeer. The court record is narrower and more technical. It asks what was said, whether it could be understood as fact, whether Harvey was identifiable, whether the statements were false or materially different from reality, and whether Netflix had the required legal fault. That makes the case more complicated than ordinary true crime. It is not only about alleged stalking. It is about what happens when alleged stalking becomes drama. Drama becomes a global product, and a living person says the disguise did not work. The first cracks. The first crack was not only the alleged conduct described by Gadd, it was the wording placed over the drama. The Netflix series begins with the phrase, "This is a true story." In a fictional crime thriller, viewers expect invention. In a documentary, they expect factual proof. Baby Reindeer landed in the more dangerous middle, a scripted drama with the emotional rhythm of confession and the opening claim of factual truth. The September 2024 federal court order made that wording central. The court noted that the first episode's true story framing could invite viewers to accept the statements as fact, even though the series also used dramatic devices and later credit language indicating fictionalization. That is the legal pressure point. A show can fictionalize. A creator can compress events. A writer can change names, settings, timelines, and dialogue. But if the platform tells viewers the story is true, the audience may reasonably treat dramatized claims as factual claims about real people. The difference becomes sharper because the series depicts Martha as a convicted stalker who goes to prison. Netflix later clarified to a UK parliamentary committee that the person on whom the show was based had been subject to a court order rather than a conviction. That is not a small distinction. In ordinary conversation, people blur allegation, warning, court order, conviction, and imprisonment. In law, They are separate categories. A court order is not the same as a criminal conviction. A warning is not a sentence. A fictional prison term is not a legal finding. The first public version was emotionally clear. The legal version was already more difficult. The stage show, the Netflix series, and the scale change. On stage, Baby Reindeer was intimate by design. A one-person show puts pressure on the performer's credibility, memory, and emotional exposure. The audience is physically present. The story is contained by a room. Netflix removed those boundaries. The series arrived on a platform with global distribution, algorithmic recommendation, social media amplification, and true crime audiences trained to investigate. Netflix's own 2024 viewing report placed Baby Reindeer among the major English-language performers of the first half of the year, with 88 million views reported for that period. The award's attention intensified the effect. The Television Academy lists Baby Reindeer with 6 Emmy wins, including Outstanding Limited or Anthology Series, and Outstanding Writing for a Limited or Anthology Series, or Movie. That scale changed the ethical equation. A stage audience might leave asking what the story meant. A streaming audience left asking who it was about. The audience did not need Netflix to name anyone. It had the internet. The last ordinary movements. The real chronology is not as clean as the show's 7-episode structure. Gad has described the work as rooted in his experiences, while also describing changes made for structure, protection, and dramatic form. That combination is common in autobiographical drama. It becomes risky when the marketing tells viewers they are watching a true story. Court materials describe the series as set in 2015, and following Donnie Dunn, a fictionalized version of Gad, while also noting that the show contains similarities between Martha and Harvey that the court considered relevant to identifiability. The ordinary object here is not only the cup of tea, it is also the screen. Emails, posts, messages, and old social media traces became part of the way viewers tried to connect fiction back to reality. After the show's release, amateur online searching intensified. Viewers began trying to identify real people behind fictional characters. Gad publicly asked viewers not to speculate about the identities of real people who may have inspired the show, according to later Timeline reporting on the controversy. That plea came too late to stop the wider public hunt. The search did not begin as an investigation with rules. It began as fandom with a search bar. The first alarm. The first alarm after the Netflix release was identification. Viewers focused on old social media material, biographical overlaps, phrases, locations, professional histories, and details they believed connected Harvey to Martha. Harvey then appeared publicly and denied important parts of the series' depiction, including the suggestion that she had been imprisoned for stalking. That public appearance changed the case. Before it, the controversy was mostly about internet speculation. After it, there was a named living person saying the show had damaged her. Harvey's position, as later reflected in the lawsuit and court order, was not simply that the character was unflattering. It was that the show allegedly made false statements of fact about her by making Martha identifiable and then presenting Martha as a convicted criminal who had committed serious acts. Netflix's position has been that the work is protected creative expression based on Gad's experiences, and that it should be able to defend his right to tell his story. But that defense has had to confront the strongest problem in the case: the difference between based on real events and this is a true story. The first alarm, then, was not a police siren. It was a question about identity. If a show changes the name, but leaves enough clues for viewers to find someone, has it really disguised that person? The search for an explanation. At first, the public explanation was simple. A man had told his stalking story, a major platform had adapted it, and viewers had responded to its raw honesty. That explanation did not hold. The more complicated version involved 3 overlapping truths. Stalking and harassment can be profoundly damaging. Autobiographical art often changes facts for structure and emotional accuracy. Living people can be harmed when dramatic changes are marketed as literal truth. The law does not need the public to decide whether the show felt authentic. It asks more precise questions. Were statements made of and concerning Harvey? Would a reasonable viewer understand Martha to refer to her? Were the contested statements provably false? If so, did Netflix publish them with the required level of legal fault? The federal court's September 2024 order allowed Harvey's defamation claim to continue past an early dismissal stage, while dismissing other claims in whole or in part. The order did not decide that Harvey was right. It did not decide that Netflix was liable. It meant that parts of the lawsuit were legally strong enough to proceed at that stage. That distinction is vital. Online debate tends to treat a lawsuit surviving as proof. It is not proof. It is permission for the dispute to move forward. The explanation had moved from biography to defamation law, where the show and real life separate. The biggest improvement this article needs is a clean separation between three things: what the show depicts, what Gad alleges, and what the public legal record has confirmed. Those categories are not interchangeable. The show depicts Martha as a fictional character. Gad alleges he experienced serious harassment. Harvey denies core parts of the portrayal. The court has not entered a final judgment deciding the truth of every disputed fact. That means the safest and most accurate way to write the case is not "the show was true" or "the show was fake." It is to show exactly where the public record separates from the drama. The conviction difference. The most legally important difference is the conviction. In the series, Martha is portrayed as having a criminal history connected to stalking and later receiving a prison sentence. In real life, Netflix clarified to Parliament that the person on whom the show was based was subject to a court order rather than a conviction. That difference changes everything. A viewer may treat a court order as evidence of serious concern, but a criminal conviction means the state has prosecuted a person and secured a formal finding of guilt. A prison sentence means a court has imposed punishment. Those are much stronger claims. The federal judge's order emphasized this distinction, stating that there is a major difference between stalking and being convicted of stalking in a court of law. That is why this part of the case is so dangerous for Netflix. It is not just a detail. It is the difference between alleged conduct and established criminal status. The prison sentence difference. The show gives Martha a legal ending inside the fictional world that is narratively satisfying. It tells viewers the system eventually responded. The public record around Harvey does not show a stalking conviction or prison sentence for stalking Gad. Netflix's parliamentary clarification points instead to a court order, not a conviction. That matters for reputation. Being depicted as someone who went to prison for stalking carries a different social meaning from being someone who was accused, warned, restrained, or ordered by a court not to do something. A drama can heighten stakes. A defamation court asks whether that heightening crossed into a false factual claim about a real person. The violence difference. The series depicts physical and sexualized incidents involving Martha and Donnie. Harvey's lawsuit alleges that these depictions falsely suggest she sexually assaulted and violently attacked Gad. The court order identified several alleged differences between the fictional portrayal and the real-world accusations, including sexual assault, violent attack, and other escalated conduct shown in the drama. This is legally hotter than ordinary fictionalization. A show can invent dialogue or compress timelines with relatively low risk. Inventing or materially escalating serious criminal conduct is different if viewers can identify the real person behind the character. The court did not finally decide those disputed facts, but it recognized that the difference between inappropriate touching and sexual assault, or between shoving and more severe violence, could matter to how a viewer understands the person being portrayed. That is the core legal principle. Degree matters. A dramatized act can be worse than the alleged real act in a way that changes reputational meaning. The identity difference. Netflix and GAD have argued in substance that the character was fictionalized and disguised. The court order, however, identified alleged similarities between Martha and Harvey that could allow a reasonable person to understand the character as referring to Harvey. Those alleged similarities included being Scottish, living in London, being older than Donnie or Gad, legal background, social media communication, and other traits. This does not mean the court found Netflix liable. It means the identifiability question could not simply be dismissed at that stage. For true story dramas, identity is one of the hardest problems. Changing a name may not be enough if the surrounding details create a recognizable silhouette. Viewers do not need a direct label when the internet can connect fragments. The issue is not only whether Netflix named Harvey, it is whether viewers could reasonably find her. The message. Volume difference. The show portrays an overwhelming volume of communication from Martha to Donnie. Gad has alleged extensive unwanted communication. Harvey has denied the full scale of the show's depiction and disputed key details of the portrayal. Later timeline reporting noted that Harvey denied stalking Gad and denied ever being convicted. This is one of the areas where the public should be careful. Message volume can be evidenced by records, but the public does not have a complete tested trial record resolving every disputed item. A dramatized montage may convey emotional truth without showing exact documentary accuracy. That difference matters, because viewers often process repeated messages as proof of obsession. In court, the issue becomes more technical: what records exist, who sent them, what they show, whether they are complete, and what legal meaning they carry. The legal ending difference. The series gives viewers a legal arc. The real-world case has a different legal arc. There is no public criminal trial in which a jury found Harvey guilty of stalking Gad. The current public legal proceeding is Harvey's civil claim against Netflix. Justia's appellate docket confirms the Ninth Circuit appeal was filed by Netflix entities on October 9, 2024. That difference should shape every sentence. Harvey should not be written as a convicted criminal. Gad's allegations should not be erased. Netflix should not be treated as liable before a final ruling. The accurate version is more complicated, but it is also more useful. The show asks viewers to feel the pressure of being pursued. The lawsuit asks whether the method of telling that story damaged an identifiable living person. The evidence that did not fit. The biggest evidentiary pressure point is the gap between Martha's fictional criminal history and the real-world record publicly acknowledged around Harvey. In the series, Martha is presented as having a criminal history connected to stalking and is later receiving a prison sentence. Harvey says she was never convicted or imprisoned for stalking. Netflix's own parliamentary correspondence clarified that the person on whom the show was based was subject to a court order rather than a conviction. That difference matters because defamation law treats allegations of criminal conduct as especially serious. Saying someone behaved badly is one thing. Saying they were convicted, imprisoned, or committed sexual assault is another. The court order also focused on whether the challenged statements could be understood as factual assertions. It rejected, at that early stage, Netflix's argument that dramatic elements made it obvious the series was not asserting facts. The court reasoned that the true story language at the beginning could invite viewers to accept the events as factual. That is why the case is not simply about whether the series was based on Gad's experiences. It is about whether the particular claims viewers took away were materially different from the real-world record. The evidence did not point in one clean direction. It created a legal collision. Truth, fictionalization, identification, and reputation all occupying the same frame. What stalking means in the real world. The case also needs a careful explanation of stalking, because online debate often uses the word loosely. UK prosecution guidance describes stalking behavior as conduct that may show fixation, obsession, unwanted contact, and repetition. It can overlap with harassment and coercive control, but stalking is often understood through patterns rather than one isolated incident. That helps explain why Baby Reindeer affected so many viewers. The show captured the pressure of accumulation, the repeated message, the repeated appearance, the repeated boundary crossing, the repeated uncertainty about whether police or friends will take it seriously. But the legal use of stalking still requires precision. A person can describe feeling stalked. Police can issue a warning. A court can impose an order. Prosecutors can charge an offense. A jury can convict. Each step carries different legal weight. This article does not need to minimize Gad's account to protect Harvey's legal rights. It also does not need to treat Harvey as convicted to take stalking seriously. The public version often asks the wrong question. Was the show emotionally believable? The legal version asks whether specific claims about an identifiable person were true, false, protected, or damaging. The event at the center of the case. The central event is not one night. It is not one message. It is the accumulation of alleged conduct and the later accumulation of dramatic choices. Gad's account, as reflected in public legal materials and reporting, alleges prolonged harassment involving repeated communication, unwanted attention, distressing messages, workplace contact, and conduct that affected his mental health and relationships. Harvey disputes major parts of that account. The show's version turns that disputed history into a narrative arc. Martha appears at the pub, returns repeatedly, sends messages, intrudes into Donnie's life, affects his relationships, and eventually faces legal consequences inside the fictional world. The drama also links the stalking storyline to Donnie's sexual trauma, shame, identity, and difficulty seeking help. That artistic structure is why many viewers found the series powerful. It also created the legal risk. The more emotionally convincing the show became, the more viewers treated it as fact. The court order summarized the series as being heavily based on reality despite fictional names, and it identified the true story framing as significant to how viewers might understand it. There is no public criminal trial in which a jury has found Harvey guilty of stalking Gad. There is a civil lawsuit in which Harvey claims Netflix falsely damaged her reputation, and Netflix is defending the show as creative expression grounded in Gad's experiences. That is the central factual discipline of this case. The show may be about alleged stalking, but the public legal battle is about defamation. When the story broke open. The story broke open because viewers were invited to participate. True crime audiences are trained to search. They pause frames, compare names, scan old posts, look for court records, and treat fictionalized details as clues. Baby Reindeer arrived in that culture with a title card telling them the story was true. Within weeks, the online hunt became part of the story itself. People were not only watching Donnie and Martha, they were looking for real-world equivalents. Some people were wrongly accused of being linked to darker parts of the show's story, and Gad asked viewers not to speculate about real-life identities. That public behavior matters, because it shows the modern danger in true story drama. The audience no longer passively receives a narrative. It investigates it, sometimes recklessly. Success increased the legal stakes. A small play could leave its real-life inspirations partly obscured. A global streaming hit made anonymity much harder. The cup of tea had become searchable. The courtroom question. The court case is built from fragments, because both sides need different fragments to mean different things. Harvey needs to show that Martha was identifiable as her, that the contested statements were factual rather than protected fiction or opinion, that those statements were false, and that Netflix acted with the legal fault required for defamation. Netflix needs to show that the claim cannot meet those standards, that the work is protected expression, and that the fictionalized character should not be treated as a literal factual statement about Harvey. The lower court's early ruling was important, because it rejected the idea the case should be thrown out completely at that stage. The order denied Netflix's special motion to strike, granted Netflix's motion to dismiss in part, and denied Harvey's motion to strike. The court did not decide the final truth of Gad's allegations. It did not rule that Netflix defamed Harvey. It decided that, under the relevant early legal standards, parts of the lawsuit could continue. The appeal then changed the pace. Just as appellate docket shows, Netflix entities filed appeal case 246151 in the Ninth Circuit on October 9, 2024, from the underlying Central District of California case. That appeal is not a second trial. It is a challenge to whether the district court handled the early legal ruling correctly. The public version asks, was Baby Reindeer true? The legal version asks a narrower and harder question. What happens when emotional truth is marketed as factual truth? The outcome that did not end the story. There is no final public legal outcome that ends the case as of July 9, 2026. The key confirmed procedural outcome is that Harvey's lawsuit survived in part at district court level. Netflix appealed, and later public status reporting in April 2026 stated that the case had not been resolved after the expected trial path was delayed. That unresolved status matters because public debate often outruns legal process. Online opinion tends to decide quickly. Courts move slowly because they must sort evidence, admissibility, legal standards, and protected speech. For Harvey, the case is about alleged reputational harm. She says she was made identifiable and falsely depicted as a convicted criminal and serious offender. For Netflix, the case is about the freedom to dramatize real trauma and defend a creator's right to tell his story. Both positions can be understood without pretending the law has already resolved them. The legal outcome did not end the story because the legal outcome has not yet arrived. The aftermath, people still argue about. The aftermath has split into two arguments that rarely speak the same language. The first argument is about stalking and victimhood. Many viewers saw Baby Reindeer as an unusually honest depiction of male vulnerability, coercive attention, shame, and the difficulty of asking authorities for help. UK prosecution guidance recognizes that fixation, obsession, repeated unwanted behavior, and patterns of conduct may be central to stalking cases. The second argument is about media ethics. When a story is branded as true, audiences assume a level of verification. If a character is based closely enough on a real person to be found online, disclaimers and fictional names may not be enough. A civil lawsuit cannot answer every moral question raised by the series. It cannot decide whether every viewer's reaction was fair. It cannot undo online harassment once it has happened. It cannot turn a drama back into a stage monologue performed to a smaller room. The public also tends to misread what the case is. It is not a prosecution of Harvey. It is not a retrial of every detail in Gad's life. It is a civil claim over the consequences of making a highly successful drama and attaching a factual label to it. That is why the aftermath remains alive. The court case is about legal liability. The wider debate is about power. The review, appeal, or unanswered question. The unresolved question is not simply whether Gad suffered. The record supports that he built the work around experiences he describes as traumatic, and the show's cultural impact partly came from how many people recognized patterns of shame, obsession, silence, and delayed reporting. The legal question is different. Did Netflix cross the line between dramatized personal story and defamatory factual portrayal of an identifiable living person? The appeal sharpens that issue. The Ninth Circuit docket confirms the appeal number and filing date, while the district court order shows the underlying ruling that left core claims alive at the early stage. Harvey's side rests on the seriousness of the alleged falsehoods. A person does not need to be likable, sympathetic, or blameless to be defamed. If a platform falsely tells millions of viewers that an identifiable person was convicted, imprisoned, or committed sexual assault, the law treats that as potentially grave. Netflix's side rests on expression, dramatization, and the right to tell a story grounded in lived experience. That argument matters too. If every autobiographical drama can be attacked as a literal factual profile, creators may become unable to tell difficult stories about trauma, abuse, coercion, obsession, or harm. That is the uncomfortable lesson. A true crime audience wants certainty. A defamation court often begins with precision. The public asks, who is telling the truth? The court asks which statements the law can test. Why this case matters. Baby Reindeer matters because it sits at the junction of three modern forces: personal trauma as content, true crime audience behavior, and platform-scale distribution. A private experience can become art. Art can become global entertainment. Global entertainment can become an amateur investigation. Amateur investigation can become real-world harm. That chain is not theoretical here. The show's success turned a story about being watched into a story that made viewers watch real people. It exposed how quickly audiences can move from empathy to identification, from identification to accusation, and from accusation to harassment. The case also matters for victims of stalking and harassment. Poor media handling should not become an excuse to minimize the reality of stalking, especially when official guidance recognizes how damaging repeated unwanted contact can be. But concern for victims does not remove the need for accuracy when living people are depicted as criminals. That is the hardest part of the story. Two things can be true at once. A creator can have a serious story to tell, and a platform can still face legal questions about how that story was packaged. The cup of tea remains the image, because it is so ordinary. In the show, it is the small kindness that opens the door. In the real-world case, it is the symbol of something much larger: how one human encounter can become memory, performance, product, lawsuit, and public argument. The cup was never the whole story. It was the point where everyone later started looking.